Good. Welcome, everyone. My name is Barbara Suits. I am the Open Educational Resources and Instructional Materials Program Manager over at OSPI. And it'll be great to share information about our Washington OER Hub with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for popping by. I think what we're going to kind of divide this session up into couple different sections. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the hub. We'll go through a bit of the organization and the structure just via slides, and then we will we'll actually jump over to the platform itself, where you guys can kind of follow along as I point out some strategies for finding resources and making adaptations. And towards the end, we actually have a little bit longer time than some of the other sessions. I will let folks stick around and play and give assistance if you would like, but if you would like to leave at 3:30, that's fine too. So we'll give you an option of either of those things. So let's get going. Just a couple of housekeeping things. You've been doing this for a couple of days now, so this is probably old hat to everyone by now. But if you would like to maximize the slide deck, just double click on it and it'll minimize my my video a little bit. In fact, I'll probably go off of video sometime pretty quickly here, just so we don't run into any technical issues. I've had a little bit of a problem with that in other sessions. Sound check. So if you could just type in chat and let me know if you can hear me, that'll let me know that I am not talking to dead air. Thanks, Darcy. And you obviously know where the chat is. So if you have any questions that pop up along the way, please let me know in chat, and I'll be happy to stop at any time and we can address those. Chat's going to be our primary way of communicating back and forth too. So when I ask any questions or anything like that, just pop the answer in the chat window. Wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement. I am joining you all today from the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island people at the little bit north of Olympia. If you know the nearest tribal partner to where you live and would like to pop it in the chat window now, I'd love to see what kind of representation we have. Cowlitz, great. Chehalis and Tulalip, Yakima. We've got a nice representation from different parts of the state. Nice to see. So there are three main goals that we have for the session today. One is, of course, to understand what in the world the Washington OER Hub is, a little bit about its purpose and the way that it's organized. We're going to take some time to actually explore the platform, and as I mentioned earlier, learn how to do some searches for resources, how to save them, kind of see what is actually on the platform. And lastly, we'll spend some time learning how to adapt content, how to remix it to meet the needs of your district and your students and their teachers. But we'll start off with a little bit of a quiz. So don't type anything yet. I'm going to have you all enter your answer into the chat window here in just a few minutes. But take a look at the different possibilities of answers here. The question, of course, is what are open educational resources, or OER? That is what we're talking about today. So if you were thinking that you belong in another session, now would be the time to bail. But I hope you don't, because we have a lot of good material to cover. So think about answer 1, 2, 3, or 4. Don't type it in just yet. but we're thinking about what are open educational resources. All right, so on the count of 3, I'm going to have everybody enter their answer into the chat window, and we'll get a nice chat waterfall or chatterfall or whatever you want to call it happening over there. So counting down, 3, 2, 1. So number 4 is 4. Oh my goodness. Everyone says 4. Great. Thanks for playing along. That's actually not correct, but it's a really common assumption. And oftentimes the one that messes people up are answer number 1, which is any resource you can access for free online. And number 2, also resources created by educational institutions. Neither of those are necessarily open. But the correct answer is actually any resource that is openly licensed and gives you permission to freely use, adapt, and share. So these are the resources that we're talking about when we're talking about OER. You can think about it this way. OER is kind of free plus. The fact that it's free is wonderful. We all like free, but I would actually argue that it is the permissions that are associated with open resources that are actually much more useful and impactful. And we usually talk about the 5 R's of something being open. The first is the ability to retain content. And this one is really important, especially for the K-12 environment. Retaining the document means you can actually download it from wherever it happens to be residing on the internet and put it on your own server. You can add it to your own LMS. You can essentially take control over that resource, so you're no longer dependent on a live internet connection to get there. So the ability to do that is really critical. The other R is reuse. You can use content ad nauseum as long as you want to. There's no 1-month free trial. It is just yours to use in perpetuity. You can remix. So you could take a little bit of one great open resource and add it to a little bit of another and kind of Frankenstein together this new resource that best suits the needs of your district. You can revise, you can adapt and update. Oh, I'm sorry, I was distracted by the chat, but it looks like someone is not sharing their audio. Okay, great. Apologies for that. Squirrel, shiny thing. I need to focus on the presentation at hand. You can revise. You can make adaptations to suit the needs of your student population. And lastly, you can redistribute. So you can take this new resource that you've adapted and just really, honed in on the needs of your particular population, and you can share that with other folks. And that is not something that you can do with any free resource on the internet. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great free resources out there, but the bar for open is just a little bit higher and lets you do a few more things and really take advantage of the resource. Does that make sense to folks? Any questions so far? So back in 2012, the Washington State Legislature actually passed a bill which directed OSPI to create a collection of openly licensed resources and an associated awareness campaign that went around those, letting districts know that open resources were out there and were available for you to consider when you were looking at instructional materials. We've really kind of divided our efforts into 3 big buckets of work. The first being this awareness and advocacy piece, just letting districts know that these resources are out there and providing resources to kind of help determine the quality and the applicability of openly licensed materials as you're considering instructional materials. The next big bucket of work is the review of existing open resources and also the collaborative development of materials. We work with districts and organizations when they are creating materials to make sure that they're openly licensed so we can increase their dissemination. And the last big bucket of work we do is the one that we're going to be talking about today, which is this creation of an OER library or a repository of resources that have been either developed by OSPI or our grantees or our collaborators and are aligned with Washington State Learning Standards. The Washington OER Hub, which is why you guys are all here today, is it's an online platform. And it is a platform that we use to share K-12 resources that have been created by or curated for Washington educators. Just by a quick note in the chat window, if you have used the Washington OER Hub before, could you just type a yes or a no into the chat window, and we'll get a little bit of an idea if this is familiar to folks. Oh, I'm seeing lots of yeses. Excellent. Perfect. Well, for those of you that have not seen it before, I am happy to be able to share the resource with you. And for those that are familiar with it, I'm excited to point out some new features and some new resources that are available on the platform. And the goal of the hub is really pretty straightforward. It's to really take advantage of the powerful permissions of open licensing to share resources widely and equitably so that it doesn't matter what district you happen to reside in, but you have access to really quality, highly aligned instructional materials. On the link that Darcy's been posting into the chat, you will find a resource slide that has links to the Washington Hub, to a user guide, to all of the resources that we're going to be talking about over the course of this afternoon. So you will have access to all of that information. There are a number of different ways that resources make their way into our Washington OER Hub. The one thing I think it's really important to note is that this is not and will never be a huge repository of thousands and thousands of resources. Those exist out there, and a lot of them are really great, but we don't need to recreate that wheel. Instead, we would really like a platform that highlights resources that have been created by Washington educators and that have been reviewed and are standards aligned. What we were finding over the course of many years, of course, OSPI has given out money to districts via grants. And a lot of great resources were created and are being created currently. But what tends to happen is that they live in the district where they were created, and oftentimes the individuals that created materials leave and it gets just left behind on somebody's computer or in somebody's filing cabinet or things like that. This is really a way that those resources can live on and that they can be shared and continue to be iterated upon so that they don't die a quiet, slow death in somebody's desktop or laptop. So the way that resources make their way into the hub is, first of all, we have some existing material that was created by OSPI. We don't do a lot of instructional materials creation, but every once in a while there is a legislative mandate that directs us to do that. Think about things like the Since Time Immemorial set of instructional materials. That is something that is posted on our website, but also is connected to our Washington OER Hub. Oftentimes we have external partners in different state organizations that are also providing us with materials. We've worked closely with our Washington Secretary of State's office. There's a lot of great election and civics resources on there. We have a lot of Washington-specific primary documents from the Washington State Library. We do collaborative development with educators, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that when we're looking at the hub, but we'll bring educators in a certain content area together to bring their favorite lessons, and we'll spend a bit of time making sure that all the permissions are in place and we apply an open license so that they can be shared. Lately, specifically at the outset of the pandemic, we've started curating some external resources as well. So we do know that there are a lot of great freely available resources on the internet, but we wanted to take some time to really have some expert Washington educators put eyeballs on those and review those and put them into different content collections that our districts might lean into. And lastly, grants. The OER project does provide small seed grants to districts that are embarking on this work of creating openly licensed materials to share across the state and around the world. So just a couple of examples of what you might find on there. I mentioned the since time immemorial tribal sovereignty instructional materials. Those are available on our Washington Hub, and those are available to download and to, where possible, adapt for your specific region and your local tribal partners. We also have the Modeling Our World with Mathematics core instructional material. And this is a really nice set of modules that relate to mathematics to areas like health and fitness or civics or the arts. And this is a really nice career-connected set of instructional materials that a lot of districts are using. I mentioned collaborative development with district teams. A really nice example of this is our work with the social studies cadre, educators in social studies from across the state who came together to take a look at materials to make sure they were aligned to content, and then to actually swap out photos that they may have used that we didn't have permission to use to really OERize the material and make that available to other educators. And as I mentioned, we have just started creating some third-party resources as well. There are more and more large grant-funded projects from foundational or from charities, from organizations like the Gates Foundation, other large grantees, Carnegie Foundation, and they're creating full course openly licensed materials. The one that is noted on the screen here is OpenSciEd, which is a K-12 soup to nuts openly licensed science curriculum. So we've certainly had folks that have put eyes on that and are willing to kind of put that forward as something that districts might want to take a look at and consider. And sometimes these different pathways for getting resources into the hub come together in a really beautiful way. I like this example here. We've worked with with the Washington League of Women Voters. Some of you might be familiar with a resource they created called The State We're in, Washington, which was targeted towards middle school students, all about Washington state history. We worked with them a few years ago to actually apply an open license to that work. So that gave other educators the ability to adapt and change it to their needs. We had a number of OER grantee districts that actually took that State We're in Washington work. And in the case of Seattle Public Schools, they translated it. They translated it for their dual language programs into Chinese and Japanese and Spanish. We had other groups that were able to come together and do some collaborative development around that. So we had social studies teachers that took that openly licensed stateware and Washington work and added inquiry-based lessons and units that went alongside of that. So all of those materials are available for adapting and sharing, and they're up on the Washington Hub. You might be wondering what the criteria is for us putting resources on this platform. We actually have two kind of levels of oversight. There is some submission criteria. So, and I'm gonna back up again just a little bit so you can see some of the submission criteria in a slightly larger font. But what we're looking for are things like, does the resource have clear learning objectives and goals? Is it obviously aligned to our Washington learning standards? We have folks looking at accuracy and relevance. Is it culturally appropriate? Does it support sound teaching practice? And does it have suggestions for activities that are a little bit more user-friendly? You know, could it be used in a remote setting if necessary? Are different content areas integrated together? So these are kind of all of the things that we look for that submission to the Hub. In addition to that, though, we do have some educators that we've contracted with that are taking an even closer look at some of the resources. If any of you are familiar with the EQUIP rubric, which is Educators Evaluating Quality Instructional Products, and it's a rubric that we recommend that instructional materials review teams use when they're looking at individual units or lessons. We've adapted that just a little bit, made it a bit more streamlined, and that is the lens that we use when we're looking at resources. Resources that have gone through this process and have been approved by educators using this tool. There's a little badge on it. It's a little OSPI badge that you can see. So it's a, I don't know, a good housekeeping seal of approval, I suppose, if you will. It's not an endorsement or even a recommended use, but it is an indication that it really has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb by educators. We're just starting to do this work. So as you look at resources, and we go there in a minute to look at the Hub, you know, don't be alarmed if you don't see these OSPI badges all over everything. It's just the beginning of the process, and we have not reached, you know, a large number of resources yet, but it is happening. Questions at all? Let me pause for a moment. I'm not seeing anything in the chat window. I'm trying to practice my wait time, but it's also very silent. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Just know that if you do have questions, please just pop in at any time. The Washington OER Hub is divided up into three main sections. One is just a bit of OER information that you might find, just information about the Hub itself and how to use it. We have a playlist of kind of highlighted resources that you might want to take a look at. In fact, let me jump there right now. So this is the OER information section of the Hub. And I'm going to play a piece of a video so you can kind of take a look at one of the resources that you might be interested in exploring in more depth. Everybody cross your fingers. I'm going to hit the play button, and Darcy tells me that you can hear this on your end, even if I can't. But I'm sure that I will note in the chat window if you're not hearing anything. So let's give this a shot.
Hi, my name is Daniel Irvin, and I'm an instructional specialist in the Highline Public Schools. We're sitting here in one of our elementary schools where we're going to show you a classroom where our materials for instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, and fluency are in action. Before we jump into the classroom, let me show you where to find those. If you navigate to the Washington OER Commons Hub, you can scroll down and then go to Washington English Language Arts. When that loads, you're going to see several resources, and the Highline Word Study Guides are going to be one of those. As you can see here, we have a kindergarten guide, a first grade guide, a second grade guide, and a guide for differentiation for students in 3rd through 5th grade. I think you're really going to enjoy the second grade classroom that we're about to see. You'll see students engaged and really enjoying their phonological awareness, phonics, and fluency instruction. And you'll see that instruction at a level that's appropriate for those students at this time of the year. So let's go check it out.
Any other ways to spell?
One thing to notice about the way these phonics lessons are progressing is that there is a clear purpose. There's student engagement with every skill that is being practiced. So the lesson is fun, it's engaging, it's fast-paced, and there are no times when the kids are just sitting and not engaged.
Are you ready for your first word to write? Yes. Your word is speak.
When you read the routine in the guide, you'll see that this teacher has adapted it to the needs of her students and made it her own as a skilled teacher. So as a skilled teacher yourself, you'll be making those adjustments to the curriculum as you go with a strong framework behind your work.
I like to adapt my lessons to the needs of
it goes on, but I'm going to stop that there. I think that's just a really beautiful example of the power of an openly licensed resource. So you have advantage to a really strong set of materials to start out with that you can then adapt to meet the needs of your students. And a thank you in this case to Highline Public Schools that made this available as an open resource and are sharing it with folks across the state. There are also highlights from other resources that have been created. We will continue to do these highlights and make updates to that to just kind of shine a bit of a spotlight on some really fantastic resources that are being developed. This playlist, by the way, is it's linked in that resource that Darcy has been pinning multiple times in there. I've added the link to the playlist there as well. So OER information is one of the sections on our hub. The other sections, first one we'll talk about are the continuous learning collections. These are collections that were really added at the very beginning of the pandemic. We were getting a lot of requests for suggestions for good resources for remote learning. And so these are all areas that they contain all the resources that have been created by Washington educators in collaboration with OSPI or AESD, but they also have some external resources as well. So all of these materials in the learning collections are aligned to standards, and they oftentimes integrate multiple different subject areas, and they definitely are good options when you're looking at lessons and units for remote learning. The last big section are our working groups. These are the areas where the sausage is made. And we have kind of different categories of working groups. Some are administered by our OSPI content experts, and there's collaborative development that's going on in concert with OSPI and district teams that we might be working with to create materials. The next big bucket are our OSPI grantees and external collaborators. You'll find a number of groups in there as well. And the third kind of category, it's a little bit new. These are Washington districts and schools that we're not working directly with, but they are still doing great work around openly licensed materials. And so we wanted them to have a place to link their materials and their resources as well. All right. That said, I think we're actually going to head over to the hub and do a little bit of playing. Any questions at all about any of the stuff that we've mentioned so far, or are folks ready to do a little kind of diving into the platform? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my tab for a moment, and I'm going to bring up the actual hub itself. So on your resource guide, you should have the link to the Washington Hub, and I will put it in there as well. Just put that in the chat window. There's a direct link to the Washington Hub. And feel free to just watch as well, or if you'd like to follow along, that's fine. I'm going to do a little bit of explanation first, and then a little bit down the road, there'll certainly be an opportunity for you to jump in and play as well. Could I just get a quick yes? I was going to say thumbs up, but I can't see any of you. So just a yes in the chat window if you have reached the Washington OER Hub. Yes, great. And you should be seeing it on my screen as well. Perfect. All right, so this is the online platform that we're talking about. The Washington Hub is actually it's a little niche that we've carved out of the much larger OER Commons platform. OER Commons is a digital repository of openly licensed resources. They have about, I don't know, 60 to 70,000 resources, and the number is growing quite dramatically every day. However, we are, again, we made this kind of smaller subset just for Washington. If for some reason you're not finding resources that you're looking for on the Washington Hub, you can always jump out to the larger platform just by clicking on the OER Commons icon here on top. That's going to take you to the larger pool of resources on OER Commons. I'm going to maximize my screen here for a minute. So I'm gonna lose the chat window for a second. So if I'm not responding to you, my apologies. I will continue to try and look over there every once in a while. You'll notice if I scroll down, you'll see the different sections that I was talking about, and you can go there directly by just clicking on the hyperlinks. So if you want to see the video highlights, that will just jump you down to the bottom of the screen. But you can also just scroll up and down vertically, and you can find those different sections. So our working groups and our learning collections are all there. When you're looking for resources, there are a few different ways that you can do it. You can look in a learning collection, you can look directly in a working group, or if you really have no idea where to start, there's probably the most obvious way, which is the giant search, window here where it says Search Hub Resources. So I'm just going to type in a search term like Washington State History. Probably should have chosen something shorter. And just hit enter. And it's going to do some thinking and come back with about 60 different results that are dealing with Washington State history. You'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, there are some filters that you can use to kind of narrow down those search results a little bit. So maybe you're interested in a certain grade level. So under education level, maybe I'm just going to say middle school is really what I'm looking for. And I've knocked it down to 46. Perhaps I'm interested in a certain educational use or material type. let's say that I would really like something that was a lesson or a unit. I could find that if I'm sorry, I'm going to look under material type for that one. Say I was looking for a lesson or maybe a unit of study. So again, I've knocked it down to 28, which seems like a little bit more reasonable type of search for those resources. One thing I would be careful of is putting on so many filters at the outset that you narrow the net of resources that you're going to be finding. So just kind of add one filter at a time and see how that affects your search results, because you don't want to exclude you know, what potentially could be really useful stuff. In addition to the filters on the left-hand side, you'll also notice that there is there's some sorting options that you have on the top. So currently it's sorted by relevance to the term Washington State history that I typed in. But let's say I'm really curious about, you know, what's the newest, latest, and greatest thing that's been added. I could also sort by date added, and I could see something that has been put up there more recently. Or maybe I'm interested in, you know, what has a lot of visits. What are people going to most frequently? So in this case, I might find the work that we did with the Secretary of State's office on elections and voting teacher resources. So those are all different ways that you can kind of filter your search results. While we're looking at this initial resource, I'm just going to click on one so you can kind of see what it looks like when you go into the snapshot view of a resource. I'm going to take a look at the State We're in Washington Teacher Guide. As soon as you're finding a resource that you're interested in learning a little bit more about, you click into what we're going to call the snapshot view of the resource. It's going to give you a brief description of the material, and it's also going to tell you what license it has attached to it. So that'll give you an idea of the different kinds of permitted use you have with this material. You'll also notice that the standards alignments are here as well. So this particular resource is aligned to our Washington Social Studies standards, and as you click through the different numbers here, you can see which social studies standards are aligned to this particular resource. As you're looking around, and I'll let you look here in a little while, you might notice standards from other states popping up. That's because anyone that is signed into the platform has the option of adding alignments. So oftentimes you might see Maryland educators, you know, have aligned their social studies standards to a resource, or somebody in Wyoming has aligned the Wyoming science standards. So don't be alarmed if you see other states on there as well. It's just an indication that this is a great resource. Other states are finding it useful as well. And you might find other standards that it matches with also. As you look at the resource, and you can look at it by clicking View Resource, then you can dive into the actual material. In this case, this is a teacher's guide that accompanies the League of Women Voters of Washington's State We're in Washington guide. These are all of the lessons and units that were created as a companion to that work. In this particular case, there's kind of a visual menu of the different chapters. So let's say I wanted to visit the chapter on tribal governments. It's going to take me to that specific resource. And I will find the material in HTML format, so folks could actually access it online. But you can also look at the resource library that's on the right-hand side. And let's say you wanted to download. You could download it as a PDF, and you could have a print version of the materials as well. The nice part about this particular platform is that it gives you the option to download the work in a number of different formats. So let's say I wanted to put it in my Google Classroom. I could certainly do that by clicking on this Google Classroom button here. It would allow me to pull the resource into that platform. I also have the option of downloading it as an EPUB resource, which is excellent for accessibility purposes. I could take the work and I could change the background color, or I could increase the font, or do a number of things that would make it easier for a multitude of students to access. I could also download it as a common cartridge format. So if I wasn't using Google Classroom as my LMS type system, I could import it into another LMS as well. So I'm going to back out. If you ever get kind of lost looking at resources, which is easy to do, going down a rabbit hole and just looking for cool stuff, there's always this little breadcrumb back here. It's the Washington OER Hub icon that you'll see on the top bar there. If you click on that, that will always take you back to that kind of main landing page where we started just a moment ago. So I mentioned the search bar, and that was the way that we found that one particular resource. But let's say instead of just searching, you wanted to do a little bit more of a targeted search, and you might want to look in one of our continuous learning collections. It represents all of the different content areas in this first page. So let's say I wanted to look in science. Here I've got 83 different resources that I could filter in the same way I did before by education level, or I could sort by the most viewed resource or the date that it was added. In this particular case, for our science collection, it looks like this K through 5 science essential question units and resources seems to be fairly popular. And you can kind of tell here that over 1,000 folks have opened it up. And the number of saved resources means that people have kind of added it to their own curated group of resources. So that shows up there. You'll notice, by the way, that this one has that OSPI badge on it. And when you click on that, it talks about the criteria for endorsing a resource that I mentioned earlier. And I really don't like the word endorse. That is kind of a not changeable portion of the platform. Really think of it more as a review than an endorsement. So that's certainly another way that you can look for resources, is by looking into the content area collections. We've also created collections for different target audiences. So you'll notice up here that there's kind of two hyperlinks. One is the content area or practice collections, but the other is the audience collection. So let's say you specifically want to look for a resource that might be appropriate for families or for supporting multilingual English learners. We're starting to build out those collections as well. One of the most recent resources that we added was in the supporting our youngest learners category. I'm going to sort by date added, just because I know this one was added fairly recently. Our early learning team has been hard at work creating some kind of back to school re-entry resources that are going to be appropriate for our youngest students. And so they've compiled these different materials that you might want to lean into as you're planning for the new school year. And like the other resource, this particular one has a kind of virtual menu of the different categories. So if you're interested in assessment resources for pre-K through 3, you might want to click on that section there, and you'll be taken to an area that talks about those resources specifically. Not all of the resources on our Washington Hub have this kind of visual menu. That's something that I think some of the more newer resources that we're adding have. So don't expect to see that in every resource, I guess is what I'm saying. All right. Oh, I just closed that entire thing, didn't I? Hang on just a moment. My apologies. Are you all seeing the Washington OER Hub page that I've reopened, or do I need to do a new share? Do a new share. Thank you very much. The dangers of that X in the upper right-hand corner. All right, we should be back. Perfect. I'm going to send you guys off on a little scavenger hunt here in a minute, but before I do that, are there any questions about resources on the Hub, how to find them? All right, we talked about a few different ways to look for resource. So I'm gonna give you guys some hands-on time to see what you can find. So I'm gonna send you on a scavenger hunt here, and let's see if you can find, through whatever means you would like to, look in the learning collections, look in the work groups, which I actually didn't show you. We'll go back and show you that in a little bit, or just use the search bar. And let's look for an elementary ELA resource, something that would be appropriate for, I don't know, first or second grade. If you find something, just copy the URL of the resource once you locate it. And in just a second, I'll ask you to paste that into the chat window. So go forth and search and just copy the URL of the resource that you find. And I'll give you, I don't know, 30 seconds here. I'll be generous. I'll give you a minute. Oh, looks like we have some stuff going into the chat window here. Great. Someone found the Highline Public Schools Word Study Guides. Perfect. Chrome extensions for struggling students and special needs. Perfect. Yeah, you'll find there's a number of different resources that are meeting those criteria for sure. Did folks use the search bar, or did you go into a learning collection? I'm just curious. Search box. Great. Yeah, and either one of those works. You'll find, you know, the search strategy you use kind of probably depends on the material that you're looking for. But hopefully they're all tagged in a way that you'll be able to find them no matter what option you choose. I do want to mention really quickly, and I skipped this section earlier, the working group section. These are groups of educators that are actually creating resources. You don't need to join any specific groups, because typically that's reserved for the teams that are actually making the resources to have a space for collaborative development of materials. However, there is one group that we are certainly asking everyone to join, and that is the Washington OER Information Group. And the reason for that is that if you join this group, you are then kind of attached to the Washington Hub. And so some of the shortcuts to get places will automatically take you to the Washington Hub if you enter OER Commons, the main platform. So it's just a way that you can make your finding of materials a little bit easier. And the Washington OER Information Group is hopefully quite helpful. It has a lot of resources that I think you might want to take a closer look at. We have just a one-pager on the hub itself, which is certainly a nice thing to download and share with your colleagues to let them know that this is a resource that's available to them. There's a whole user guide that provides information on how to use the hub and kind of talks you through, or actually you can read through and get a lot of the same information that we're going over today. So this is just a quick look at the user guide. It talks a little bit about some of the background information that we talked about and what OER is, and it also links to some videos that give you a little bit of information about using the hub effectively and finding resources. So joining a group, or the one group that we're talking about, it's a pretty easy thing to do. The one thing you do need to be is registered on the OER Commons platform before you can actually join a group. And you'll notice that on the very upper bar here, on the far right corner, you'll see a little circle that has my picture in it. That means that I am logged on as a user. You do not need to be logged on to search for resources, to download resources, or do any of that. You do, however, need to be logged on if you are going to save any resources to kind of your own little personal library, or if you're going to remix materials and make adaptations. So I'm going to log off really quickly and show you what it looks like to sign in. This is the main OER Commons platform. If I want to actually register, all I would need to do is create an account just by hitting that register button. And it's only going to ask you for two pieces of information. It's going to ask you for your email, and it'll also ask you to create a password. And then at that point, it will email you a little note that says, hey, you know, was this you that actually signed up? And you would just confirm. And that's all it takes for registering for this platform. And obviously it goes without saying that when you create your password, please make it a strong password and not your, you know, your bank account number or anything like that. Once you are signed in, you can go to this Hubs category. And if you're a member of the Washington OER Hub, and that would happen by joining that OER information group, then there's a little shortcut to actually get there. If you're not a member, you would just look at all of the different hubs that are out there, and you could select one that you might want to visit. So let's say for instance, boy, words are hard. Let's say, for instance, you are looking at, or you're interested in seeing what other states are doing. You might want to hop onto the Idaho or the Maryland hub, or the Nebraska, or Oregon just opened one as well. So there are a lot of other states and other organizations that are doing similar work to what we're doing. So again, if you're not finding what you're looking for on our hub, you might want to expand your search and see what other folks are doing as well. So back to working groups. To join the Washington OER Hub, once you are signed up with OER Commons, there'll be a big green button here, and instead of contribute to this group, it says join this group. And you just click on that, and that will attach your email to the Washington Hub. You do not get spam from OER Commons at all. The only thing that would happen is if sometimes I will have an announcement just of general interest to people using the hub, and I might send an email that a new resource is online. Oh, Michael, am I advancing my screen? Are you not seeing the hub that I'm clicking on? Let me make sure that I am sharing my screen. It looks like it. Yep. Interesting. Okay, let's do this. Are we back now? Oh yeah, I'm just sharing a website right now. We're not on the slides anymore at all. So all you should be seeing is the Washington OER Hub. The location to sign up for the hub. Yeah, if you register on OER Commons and you accept that email that says you meant to do that, all you need to do, and I'm just going to use this kind of shortcut to go back to the Washington OER Hub. And this link is, I'll put it in the chat window. So once you're on the Washington Hub, just go down to working groups and you can scroll down or you can use the hyperlink. Go to Washington OER information and click, it won't say contribute to this group for you. If you haven't joined yet, it'll say join this group. So just click that green button and that will get you affiliated with the group. Just joined and signed up for quarterly OER newsletters. Thank you, Thomasina. That means I actually have to start making quarterly newsletters now. That's always my aspirational goal. I'm working at it. I suspect I'm talking to people that have the same type of goals. All right, so let's do another scavenger hunt search here. Going to make this one a little bit harder. I want you to use whatever search strategy you want to. See if you can find a high school level geometry task. Looks like people are finding stuff. Fantastic. So I'm gonna use this search strategy. I'm gonna go to the Math Continuous Learning Collections. Under Education Level, I'm going to make sure to look for high school. And I will be able to find a number of resources. If I'd like to narrow it down a little bit more, maybe I'm going to look for a task under the search bar. And I'm going to find a bunch of different resources. A lot of these were recently added by our mathematics team. These are instructional tasks that were created by OSPI. I'm going to just log into one. Let's see. There was a boat one I was using earlier. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. And I can take a look at the resource and see what it's aligned to, certainly. As I look at this resource, let's say as an educator that this is working great for me, but my district really needs to change a few things because my students are having a hard time understanding something. So I do have the option, if I am signed in, of remixing this resource. So I can just hit this green remix button. And essentially what it's just done is create a new copy of that resource. So let's say that this is now, it's not OSPI's anymore. This is going to be my statistics and geometry instructional task. Let's say that, you know what, I'd really like to use a different boat picture. So I'm just going to hit the change button and I'm going to select a new graphic. If I want to actually change the text of the resource, you'll notice this little down arrow button for each of the sections. It's just going to open up what you see is what you get editor. And you can just go in and just, you can make changes to the text. You can add things. In this case, let's say that I have a really great video that I think is going to be helpful for my students. I'm just copying a link in the background here that you're not seeing. But on this editing bar, which should look fairly familiar, it's a pretty standard web editing bar. But there's an option that looks like a little play button. So I'm going to hit that insert video. and it will just embed that video in this particular lesson. So I can go through, I can make whatever changes I want. If there, maybe there's a handout that I find particularly useful, I can click this little paperclip icon and I can upload a file if I would like to. So maybe there's a, I don't know, some sort of, you know, I was going to say handout, but I hate using handouts. So maybe not a handout, but something that's going to help them, maybe some practice activities that you have. You could certainly upload that file as well and make that a resource. And essentially, I would just go through the process of making this, you know, a personal resource. And then I could, if I keep hitting the next button, it will allow me to add a description. It will allow me to put what education levels it's appropriate for. And at the end of the day, I can publish this resource to the Washington Hub so that my students can access it, my district can access it, and so can other folks as well. I'm actually not going to publish it because there were not any changes that I would like to have other people take advantage of. But again, remixing is a really nice option if you find a resource that you like, but you would just like to make some tweaks to make it your own. Now, there's some resources, when you click on them, you won't actually get a copy of the resource. Instead, it will just be a direct link to an external resource. And in those cases, you will not have the option of remixing. So let's say, for instance, I saw one earlier that was on and I chose this one just because it popped up earlier. But this was recently created for OSPI by an external contractor. It's the history of Washington State's land, food, and people. And I have the same description that I saw earlier and the same alignment information, but this time when I click View Resource, it's actually going to take me to a little bit of a description and to an external site. So this is actually going to take me to an external Moodle site to access this resource. So you might find that as well. So you'll find resources that you can download and adapt. Oh, we see nothing. That's because I changed to another tab. Sorry. You'll have to take my word on it. It will take you to an external site, which is not being shared at the moment. So I'm back to our OER Commons site. Yes, folks see nothing. Okay, let me share this particular tab so that you can at least see where I was going. Okay, we should be back on OER Commons now. Yeah, my apologies. Every time I click to an external tab, I seem to lose connection with the shared screen. So I will not do that anymore. You'll just have to believe me when you play around with this that some of these resources go to external sites. You don't see that either, Michael. So you don't see anything anymore. Interesting. Oh, now we do. Okay, perfect. All right. I think I'm going to stop there for now. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have. And then I will also invite people who would like to stick around and play a little bit more with the platform to do that. But if you would like to depart the session for now, I certainly understand. So please know that I'm happy to stick around, answer any questions, and work with you as you explore the site. But I do certainly hope that you will spend some time taking a look at the platform, letting educators in your district know that this is a resource and available to folks. And please feel free to contact me if and when you have any questions about the material. One suggestion I do have is to take a look at the OER showcase on the that resource that was linked earlier that had all of the presentation links. That is the most current crop of our OER grantees, and it talks a little bit about the materials that they've been creating. There's some great stuff on world languages and health and physical education, and also some really nice financial literacy work that's been translated into American Sign Language. So lots of really cool resources that you might be interested in, and that is the OER showcase that you will find on the playlist. All right, everybody, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I will go back on video to just say a quick goodbye to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference, and again, I will be here to answer any questions you have, but we will let some folks go if they need to get to other sessions. Oh, thanks, Fawn. I'm so glad that you'll be sharing the information out. Yeah, Sherry, we're working with Shape Washington, just received a grant, and they're going to be creating some more health and fitness offerings. That is a section where we are striving to put more, because right now it's pretty resource poor, but we're working to change that. Washington, no, the video I'm referring to, Deborah, you know what, just a second, let me pop the, well, actually, if you look on the playlist, so you should already have the link to the playlist. It's called OER Grantee Showcase. It's the most recent one that was just done. And we've got Seattle Public Schools, the Center for Deaf and Hearing and Hearing Youth, Tacoma School District. They all talk for about 5 or 6 minutes on the different resources that they've developed. Yeah, and some really great work that's going on. I'm going to actually put the platform back up on screen so that if anybody does have any specific questions about the hub, I can answer that. So I am monitoring chat, and just let me know if you do have any questions, or if you have any resources that you're looking at. I'll be happy to try and point you in that direction. Oh, I should say for CTE resources specifically, our hub is working on getting more of those. Nebraska, however, has some really nice CTE specific resources, so you might want to take a look at their hub. And to get there, again, you go to Hubs, and if you see all hubs, you can scroll down and find, should be alphabetical, Nebraska OER. And they've got a lot of nice CTE stuff. One thing I should have mentioned was actually saving a resource. I did not tell you how to do that. But once you register, what you can do, I'm gonna pick a resource at random here. This is just the first thing I found. You'll notice that there's a save button here. If you click that, what will happen is a menu pops up. If you're joined any groups, it'll give you the option to save in those groups. But most of the time, you'll just want to save it under My Items. And what happens then is this little picture up here, or it might be a gray box or gray circle for you currently. It's your user menu. And the first thing on there is My Items. And this is just kind of think of it as a file folder, right, where you're saving all of the different things that you, think might be useful to come back to later. All of the remixes that you do, they're all kind of saved in this library. So this is just a quick way to find resources that you have flagged as being interesting, and you might want to go back and explore in more depth. If you ever want to change your profile information, this little user menu here is how you would do that as well. You would just go down to profile information. You can add as much, professional information as you would like to in the About Me section. You can change your picture, and you can also reset your password. So if for any reason you would like to do a password change, this is the section you would do that as well. And again, that's the user menu that you'll be able to access when you are logged on. Just click on what currently is a big gray circle and drop that down, and that's how you find the information about My Items and changing your account, your password, and your profile information. As we still have a few folks that are here, let me show one more resource that you might find useful. And that is this selecting and reviewing OER for district adoption. If any of you do happen to be have an adoption cycle coming up, and you're interested in knowing what openly licensed options are available for your review team to take a look at, this is a resource that you might want to dive into. I'm going to just paste it into the chat window. But what we've tried to do is actually going to jump you over here. Excuse all the hops. I clicked on the wrong thing. So let's say mathematics for interest, for example. This is going to list all the different openly licensed options in there based on grade band. And it's going to tell you different places where you're able to find the material. And if Ed Reports has done any review of the work, that's linked there as well. So we have one of these documents for math, one for science, and one for ELA. So that's a nice resource, again, if you're looking for core instructional materials that are openly licensed and can be run through a review process. So if that's what you're talking about, there's definitely a way you can do that. So if you go to the Groups tab, then and go to See All Groups, this is really easy. You're just going to create a group, put in your district name, put a little bit of a description, and essentially you've just created your own group. And then at that point, you can save resources to that group. So here's a nice example of a homeschool district that did just that. In River Homelink, they just created their own group, and they created a bunch of folders for different grades, and they've essentially just started curating resources and put different materials that they liked into those groups. If they find something on OER Commons that they think is, useful for their educators, they would just hit that save button and save it into a particular folder in this group. You can do that on the platform free of cost. So just go ahead and go forth and share. Sharing without, yes, teachers pay teachers is a hard word for me to hear. There are so many copyright violations going on. Teachers pay teachers. It's kind of scary. So please think of this as a better option when you're searching for resources that can be legally shared and we think are really high quality. In the user's guide, Billy, which you have a link to, there should be a section on creating groups too that'll kind of give you some screenshots if I went through that too quickly. But just a quick recap, just go to groups, see all groups, and then there's create. But yeah, it's a really nice way for you guys to start curating resources that are going to work for you. I think that we are going to get kicked off the platform in about a minute here. So let me just say goodbye again to everyone. Please contact me if you have any questions. And thanks so much for spending some time with me this afternoon. I hope you find some great materials that are going to work for your district.